All right, everybody, we are back with another Meet Your Maker by Horror Joy. And our maker for today is Aimee Pokwatka. She is an incredible author. Her debut self-portrait With Nothing was received very well, highly regarded, and her follow-up, The Parliament, also well regarded. And today I'm so excited to talk about your new book coming out. I guess by the time this will release, it will have already been out, but your new book, Accumulation. Aimee, thank you so much for joining us today on Horror Joy Meet Your Maker.
Thank you so much for having me. I actually have so much to say about the relationship between horror and joy, so this is perfect.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, we started this kind of thinking like, oh, do other people think that there is joy to be found in horror? And who better to ask than the people that are creating it? So I'll ask the question, what do you think about the relationship between horror and joy? I'm excited about the answer.
I have a book coming out that's a haunted house novel, but the book that I've been working on in the meantime is actually very much about the relationship between suffering and joy. And I came to this theme. I was trying to basically write a funny book about depression. It's about a cult, and I had been listening to Ross Gay's The Book of Delights, which is a book that I love. Actually, I was thinking about it today. It's strange that thinking about the relationship between horror and joy, I actually always give this book about delight to people who I know are grieving. But there's a particular essay where Ross Gay talks about Zadie Smith's essay, Joy. And so in the essay by Zadie Smith, she differentiates between pleasure and joy. They're not the same thing. Pleasure is something that you feel like a fleeting delight. Joy is much deeper. And she talks about examples of when she has experienced joy. And one of them she talks about is falling in love with her husband, being on a train to Auschwitz, and sitting with her feet in his lap. And she says something along the lines of, we were headed toward that which makes life intolerable while feeling that which makes life worth living. And I was just so struck by the idea that we experience joy because we know that suffering exists. And a lot of that has to do with death. Ross Gay, when he's talking about this essay, says that annihilation is part of the program. We forget as we go through our day that everything and everyone we love will die. Our children, our pets, the earth is all going to die. And he uses the phrase, especially we talk about this with parenting, he uses the phrase, parents are in constant communion with terror. And I really think that is what horror does, that other genres don't necessarily do. They put us in communion with terror in a way that opens us up to remembering what it is that makes life worth living in the face of all these horrors. And I also think the word communion really sticks with me in this essay because it's not just about being in communion with our own terror, but with each other's. Because when we experience horror and we talk about it with people, when we see a movie together, my sorrow, my terror, my horrors are the same as yours. Everybody's carrying some sort of terror or grief around with them. And I think horror reminds us that it's the same, that we're connected in this way. And I think there is joy in that communion. I think that's like a very necessary and sustaining thing.
I love that answer. That's a profoundly,
Yeah.
it's such a rich answer. And I think you've tied so many things that we've talked about on the podcast together. Nat Cassidy kind of framed horror as this, basically a confrontation with death. Like we are confronting death. And as you said, we're confronting not only the possibility of our death, but the grief that we have of other things dying and knowing that the things that we love will die. And the communion aspect of it, the communal taking up together of this question about death and the road to there is incredible. And what I love is that you also made this distinction. I'm a philosopher, so I love distinctions, but you made this distinction between joy and pleasure. And I really love that because it's so important. When we think about horror, it's easy to imagine that people are just getting pleasure out of these gruesome images, but the joy that we're getting is a little bit different than that. And so I absolutely love the answer.
Yeah. And I think that goes so much to parenting too for me. The book Accumulation is a lot about the monotony of parenting and domestic life. All of the moments, like childbirth is literally body horror, but it's also this moment of it's maybe the most profound moment of joy that some people experience. One of my most distinct memories is we used to live in Connecticut in Newtown, and we lived there during the school shooting that happened. And my kids were a little too young to be in that school, but I will never forget sitting there and watching the news come in and texting people and knowing that like my neighbors were literally having their lives annihilated while at the same time I was nursing my 9-month-old son and feeling his warm living body in my arms. I think that it surrounds us all the time.
I've got 3 kids, and the idea that we're just trucking along with terror at all times, I think is true.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I just can't say enough how much I love the connection you're making between that and what we get out of horror as a genre. I do want to ask, so I want to jump into Accumulation, but before we get there, curious about your origin story, both in terms of writing and horror. I know that Self-Portrait with Nothing is maybe not quite horror, but what's your journey been like as a writer and your journey into horror as a genre generally?
Yeah. So the first time I wanted to be a writer was in the 3rd grade. We were assigned to write the story of the Frog Prince, and I wrote it from the point of view of the frog. And it was like one of those moments where, like your brain just lights up doing the thing that you love. I felt that in that moment. But for most of my life, I didn't really consider being a writer an option for a job, which it really isn't. But I studied anthropology. I wanted to go be Diane Fossey and work with primates. And then I realized that I probably would not do very well, like in Africa, someone who's like a mosquito magnet. And I was shifted to working with small animals. I thought about going to vet school for a while. And then somehow in the mix of all this, I was still writing and ended up going to the Bread Loaf Writers Conference just to kind of see, just to like say, is this an option? And it was. I was like, oh, wait, people do spend their lives writing and talking about books with other people. So that sounded great to me. And I went to grad school at Syracuse and I got my MFA. And then it took me quite a long time after that to actually get my first book published. My first book, Self-Portrait with Nothing, is more sci-fi leaning. It's about the disappearance of a painter who may or may not paint people out of alternate universes. But I wrote it actually around the time that I got into horror because I was not a horror fan up to that point. As a child, I was forced to watch Nightmare on Elm Street 3 when I was like 7 years old. The scene where Freddy like disembowels a guy and then uses his guts like marionette strings and walks him off a building. So I was like, my idea of horror was that it was Freddy is under my bed and he's going to come get me and I'm terrified. And so it wasn't until around the time that The Babadook and It Follows came out and I was like, maybe I'll give this another chance. And I watched them and it was like, my mind was blown about how wrong I was. And I really started to understand what horror offered us, which is this like safe place to play with our fears. But when I was thinking about that book, I was thinking I wanted to write something scary. And what I ended up writing is not a scary book. But I was asking myself the question, what scares me? What am I afraid to write about? And the answer, I had already written something about child loss. So the next scariest thing I could think of was dealing with my own mother. So that's how I came to write Self-Portrait with Nothing. And then The Parliament, my second book, it has more horror elements. I think that ever since then, I've been creeping closer and closer to horror. And really, I think that's just like the world that we live in is so full of horrors. It feels to me increasingly like horror is the correct lens to examine, the world and how do you live in a world with so many terrible things happening. So yeah, I've taken baby steps. And even when I started writing Accumulation, I didn't sit down, like I didn't say, oh, I'm going to write a horror novel. I moved into this old house and it was weird and creepy. And I found a creepy doll in the yard. And my husband and I actually have the doll here. Apologies to podcast listeners, it's visual. We found this doll in the yard. And the main part of our house was built in the 1750s. And my husband would hide it in my underwear drawer and I would find it and scream. And then I would put it in his car console. And then I thought, what if a family moved into this weird old house and found this doll and was so busy with these silly doll related games that they failed to notice that the house was actually haunted? And then it just snowballed from there. It was literally like rolling down a hill and just picking up every part of my life as it went.
Let's talk about Accumulation because it is a haunted house story. And like haunted house stories, it takes lots of different turns and there are stairways and it's incredible. I think what I've loved about the book is that it takes, like you're saying, this premise of, oh, you move into an old house, you find a doll, and then you continue to ratchet up this tension that is not only built on the house and maybe ghosts but it's about the domestic and how men and women or just partners and spouses see each other's labor and how they fail to be seen. There's so much emotion in this book that I cannot recommend it highly enough for those of you out there who are interested in haunted house, domestic horror. If you're looking for a follow-up to Rachel Harrison's Play Nice, like this is a beautiful kind of connection with that. I want to ask you what not your experience with haunted houses, maybe you have a story to tell us, but with haunted house narratives, are you a kind of a student of you came to horror a little bit late, but um, what do you think the haunted house does for us in terms of understanding horror and grief and joy and all of those things together? The haunted house specifically, how does it play a role?
Yeah, I have always been drawn to haunted houses. Probably one of my, if I had to name my favorite book, is Beloved by Toni Morrison. So I have always loved hauntings, but not necessarily in the horror space. But Beloved was a book that really showed me that you can have a story about ghosts and have it be about this much bigger thing. Kelly Link's Stone Animals is one of my all-time favorite stories, and it's a story where the inhabitants of the house are as haunted as the house itself, and I was always really fascinated with that. I think I was thinking of the haunted house, and I studied with George Saunders, who told us, and I just drilled into my brain, that the traditional plot structure is a frame from which we can hang beautiful things. So to me, the haunted house was my frame, and I could do anything I wanted inside that frame. I could tell a story about a woman who is an artist who no longer has her outlet because of all this domestic labor, and it just gets worse and worse slowly without her even really noticing. But I think the reason that the haunted house is so appealing, and this goes back to something Kelly Link said in an interview a long time ago about vampires, and she said vampires are a flexible metaphor. And haunting is also a very flexible metaphor. There are so many ways you can turn over what it means to be haunted. And the haunted house is also, the home is domestic. It's space that is traditionally a place for women's labor. And I think that makes it especially ripe for kind of uncovering all these things that we associate with women, our trauma, mental illness, all of the fears that we have. The home is supposed to be a safe place, but when the house is not safe, then we really have to confront the things that scare us.
Yeah, I love the idea that the house, like the vampire, is a flexible metaphor. We've been doing this haunted house series, and something that I think I've seen is a couple of things. Number one is there's always a foundation, right? The house has to have a foundation. And in many ways, the foundation is questioned. So in something like Poltergeist, there's a literal moving of bodies in a cemetery to a new space. And the foundation is shown to be kind of built on the bodies of other people, which there's lots to say about that. Here, like you're saying, the foundation of the house traditionally has been women's labor. So the haunted house here disrupts this idea. And you're talking about George Saunders, and of course, Lincoln and the Bardo is another ghost story that's not really horror, but there's lots and lots of haunting that's going on. I'm curious, one thing that I did when I was reading is, so we have two characters, they're married. 10 is our mother. She's in many ways, I think, the driver of the story. And then we have Ward, that's her husband, and the father of the children. And I put their names together, and it's Ward 10. And I didn't know if you were saying anything about domesticity and imprisonment of some kind, or if that's just something Jeff and I talk a lot about how we're silly academics. We pull things out of nowhere, and maybe we just make stuff up as we go. So I didn't know if there was anything to the Ward 10.
I did not think of that when I chose the names. I mean, the names are meaningful. 10 is named after the state of Tennessee, which means a gathering place, which becomes extremely significant by the end of the book. toward a protector figure who is essentially failing to do that in the book. That felt like the correct, slightly ironic name for him. Yeah, but I do think the idea of a prison, I mean, that is what the house becomes for 10. And one of the things that I was trying to do with the book is to show that it's not just she's not helpless, she's complicit in the unhappiness of her life. She is making all these small compromises or kind of fulfilling expectations. And so that the prison that she creates is her own, it's her own creation, and she has to be the person to find the key to get herself out of it.
So one thing that I also was wanting to talk to you about, and hopefully this isn't a spoiler, so you can kind of tell me, we can move on. But one thing that happens in the book is there's these kinds of choreographies of repetition. And that felt real. Like, as somebody who has a family, I've got 3 kids, I'm married, we're getting ready to go to soccer practice right after we're done recording, and we've got to get dinner, et cetera, et cetera. There are these kinds of continued repetitions of domestic life. And in the story, those become really scary moments. So I just didn't know kind of where that came from, if you're willing to talk through the use of repetition as part of just generating scary atmospheric scenes, but B, generating a connection between the story that you're telling about a haunted house and the story you're telling about a family.
Yeah. So repetition is something that I have been obsessed with for a long time. I mentioned the Kelly Link story, Stone Animals, but the year it was published, it was in the Best American Short Story Collection. And she wrote a little blurb about it. At the end, there was like a little thing for each writer. And she talked about the use of repetition in that story and the way that repetition accrues meaning and has a spellcasting effect. So in this book, I really wanted to play with that idea of how do I create this immersive spell-like experience for the reader. But the other thing is I was really trying to explore the idea that, and 10 and Ward have a long marriage. And I have also been married for a long time. And I wanted to write about the ways that we do the same things over and over, even when they hurt us, how hard it can be to break out of those loops. It's not just repeating the domestic, monotonous things that we do every day that lull us into a sense of safety. Like, I was partially using that. I wanted to use that kind of, it's taking out the trash, it's doing the dishes, that should be safe, and to weaponize that. But also, what the characters are doing are against their best interest over and over again. And they don't know how to break out of it because they can't communicate about it. So,
I introduced this kind of silly philosophical term that I threw out for our episode on Barbarian, which is epistemic tension. And what I really love that happens in your book is that not only is it the case that they're in this kind of cycles of repetition, and they are harmful in so many ways that it's hard to get out of them, but only one of them sees it. And it's upon seeing it that not only does it seem as though there's a desire to get out of the cycles, but the person who doesn't see it now thinks of them as crazy or unanchored to the situation that they're in.
yeah.
Which again, there's just that depth of the kind of repetition that you were using so well.
Yeah. Thank you. And, the sense of doubt was also something that I really wanted to play with because it is a trope in haunted houses. And I think in horror in general that, like, we have these stories where is the woman mentally ill? Is she crazy? Or is she seeing something supernatural? And so many times we get to the end and the answer is, yep, she's just crazy. Like, she's just been crazy the whole time. And I hate it. I hate that trope. So I really wanted to write a book where, yeah, she is. She struggles with mental illness. She struggles with suicidal ideation, but she's still right. And she's still capable of recognizing when something's wrong. And she's still a very competent human being despite her struggles.
Yeah, that's right. Everything that seems to undercut her credibility, or that we take to, like you said, weaponize against somebody's credibility,
Yeah.
doesn't do that. There's still reason to believe a person's experience and what they go through. I wanted to also ask, because one of the things that we have speculated about is that in some way haunted houses require people in some way to be trapped in the house. The mortgage, right, as the kind of death agreement, right? You kind of are like, I'm going to be in this until I die in some way. but they can't get away. At the beginning, it seems like Ten and Ward have some kind of financial flexibility, but you build this in where they can't get away. And I'm curious your thoughts about this part of the haunted house where it's not just that they're there and there are things that are happening that are weird, but it's just really hard to get out of the situation.
Yeah, and I think that money is a big part of it for many people. Like, I think that is many people's reality. You buy a house and then what do you do? Like, if the house if you can't sell the house, then your options are really limited. Yeah, I was trying to write a haunted house novel, but still have it feel realistic. And I think that financial obligations and restrictions are like one of the biggest things that trap people.
I'm gonna hopefully say this with as much of a. I hope you take it as much of a compliment as I mean it. Is that I think I saw so many other like haunted house narratives in this, but in not a way that was just repeating them, like the repetition that we've talked about, or just echoing them, but playing with them and using them. Now, one thing that we're planning on doing is talking about House of Leaves. And in House of Leaves, there's these hallways, and there's a house, and there's a videographer, somebody who's very capable with video and the photographic arts. Of course, Ten is a filmmaker. I didn't know if either A, you've read House of Leaves, and B, if you've got any thoughts about how that plays into the way that your own haunted house story works.
Yeah, House of Leaves is really one of my all-time most memorable reading experiences. I think I was definitely in college when I read it. My now husband, then boyfriend, worked at like a sandwich shop. And I was reading it at night and I was so scared. Like but I was home alone and I called him and I was like, just leave the phone off the hook. So if something happens, you can hear me. I'm too afraid to read this by myself. So yeah, The House of Leaves to me has always loomed large as like the king of haunted house stories. And yeah, I think it was the house is absorbent. The house is confusing. I was thinking about that, the feeling of being inside the house in House of Leaves. And it's interesting you say that you saw these different narratives in there because was just reading this interview from Ted Chiang from The Believer in like 2019 or something, and he talks about genre. And he says genre is a conversation between authors and books across decades. So that's kind of how I think about haunted houses and horror. It's not a box that I have to live inside of. It's a conversation that I get to have with all of these other texts. And that's really exciting. That's fun. You can bring your own ideas to the party, which is a source of joy, really.
I 100% agree. I think that, again, I meant that as a compliment. I hope it was received that way. And for those of you listening, if you're thinking about picking up this book, please do not go in thinking you're going to get just like a House of Leaves pastiche or something. It is so far from that, but it's so incredibly well written. And I think there's just so much that continues to pop up. It's, oh yeah, I remember that happening. And now, oh, however many pages later, that comes to fruition. I'm curious if you'd be willing to identify any like Easter eggs or something that you think people might not pick up on, or like little, I don't even if they're like in the writing process, if there are things that you would be willing to share with us.
It's hard because the challenge of this book is that the nature of the haunting does not work the way that most hauntings do. So I really needed to lay like a very subtle foundation so that when you understand the nature of the haunting, your brain rewinds through all those moments and they suddenly click into place and make sense. So I don't want to give too much of that away, but I will tell you Easter eggs. Like this house is so much based on my own house. It's ridiculous. Like the murder stairs, the attic door that slammed shut, like every part. And so I used to always say when I was writing the book and talking about the book, I would say, I don't believe in ghosts, but I have seen one in my house. So the story is that one night I was already working on this book and I was like up late reading in bed. My husband was snoring behind me. And this room that I'm in right now is a little room in between our bedroom and the bathroom. So I was getting ready to come to bed. I was coming back through this room, like right here. The place where I'm sitting is the exact place where I saw a ghost in my house. My Zoom nook is where the ghost lives. So I was coming back through here, and out of the corner of my eye, right here, and normally when there's not a chair here, it's a bar cart. So above the bar cart, I saw a silhouette. Head, torso, like male, fairly large, nothing below it. And up to that point, like, I don't believe in ghosts. I didn't move into this house thinking I'm moved into a haunted house. Like, I love ghost stories, but I'm like, not even, I wouldn't even consider myself a spiritual person. But in that moment, my brain said, ghost. That's a ghost. And it was so real. And I ran into the bedroom, pulled the covers up over my head, and I was sitting there, like, trying to convince myself that a ghost doesn't have a body, can't hurt me. A ghost only appears if it has unfinished business, which couldn't have anything to do with me. And trying to reconcile with that very sudden, like, it was almost like a religious conversion in that moment. And since then, like, nothing. So we have weird things that happen around the house. Like, we have a napkin drawer that if we run out of napkins, sometimes the drawer will simply open right when we need a napkin. But other than that, like, we don't have too many weird haunting things happen in the house. But yeah, so much of it is based on my actual house and my actual life. It's ridiculous. It was almost like the house was giving me material and insisting that I write the story.
That's an incredible story. I love that you're sitting there where the ghost lives. I'm with you. I do not believe in ghosts, but I am very scared of ghosts at the same time. The idea of seeing one, I think, is very scary. So really appreciate that story. We are getting close to the time that we have to say, or we have to let you go. I am curious if there's anything recently that you've read or watched, played, if you play video games or board games, that has generated joy for you in the horror genre.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't something that is particularly unique, but I am part of a community of creative women and artists where I live in northern Westchester, north of New York City, and we have a film club. And normally it works like a book club where we, like, watch the movies at home and come talk about it. But a couple months ago, we did a field trip to see If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You. I'm very lucky to live close to the Jacob Burns Film Center, which is one of the best art house cinemas in the country. And Mary Bronstein was there talking about the film. And I know when I first looked at this subject, the relationship between horror and joy, the obvious answer was that we get joy from the catharsis of horror. But I think there's a big difference between individual catharsis and communal group catharsis. So I went to go see this movie with a group of women. I was surrounded by women, and watching this movie together in a theater full of women was so powerful because we were all experienced. We all knew exactly how it felt. And the sound in this movie, if you see it in a theater, is so overwhelming. It's just overpowering in the way that this mother's life is overpowered. You know, she bends and bends and bends until there's nothing left to do to break. Watching that movie in a theater and actually seeing Mary Bronstein, who was a genius, I'm obsessed with her, talk about the movie. I really admire what she was able to do, but the way that she was able to say things that women don't usually get to say on screen, or mothers don't normally get to say on screen. And when she was talking about it, she said that when they were going to studios, they kept asking, like, what are the comps? And she said, there aren't any. And there's nothing like this. It's horror, but it's funny. And I really think that's what an artist is. It's somebody who sees something that no one else can see and they bring it into the world. And to be able to experience that surrounded by other people is really a true source of joy for me.
Again, what a cool story. I love the idea of a film club. I get to teach a film class, and I think I do it just because it's so much fun to watch films with the students and to work through them with them. So just what an incredible story that is. Thank you so much for being here. Folks, if you have a haunted house story on your radar, if you just want a book to read, Accumulation is something that you should really pick up. Out May 5th, which by this time is just about a week ago. I cannot recommend this book more highly. It's a haunted house story. It's a story about domesticity. Again, if you're looking for something to pair with Play Nice, that's a beautiful pairing. Pair it with The House of Leaves. There's so many different things. Just read it on its own. It's an incredible book. Aimee, thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to talk horror and joy and domesticity and repetition and all of the things, and for sharing your ghost space with us too.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun.
All right, folks, remember, seek joy. even in horror. This has been an episode of Horror Joy, produced in conjunction with Axis Mundi Media. Thanks for joining us. We want to hear from you. You can find us at Horror Joy Pod on Instagram or at Horror Joy Pod on YouTube. You can also email us at horrorjoypod@gmail.com, all one word. And you can, of course, find us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like, subscribe, leave a review. Until next time, remember, seek joy, even in horror.